19% of all serious injuries occur on the job, and 21% of all serious injuries occur while traveling. But did you realize that only 1/100th of 1% of all serious injuries occur while attending a psychological associate's briefing like that? So actually, you're in one of the safest places you could possibly be right now. So it's one of the perks of working with psych associates. Well, in addition to being in a very safe environment, we're confident that you'll find this as being a very, very good use of your time. I'm holding a packet. It's the same packet you have in front of you. If you might want to just open that real quickly, there's a few things in there. There's an overview of the briefing, so you don't have to take a whole lot of notes as to what we're going to be talking about. There's also some information about psychoassociates and also future briefings that we're going to be having. There's also a very important tool in there that we would like for you to utilize, and that's a feedback sheet for us. And for those of you that are familiar with psychoassociates, know that we're very, very interested and we live on feedback. So we would really like your thoughts on the briefing and if there's some additional information that you'd like in particular that you see there. At the very end of the briefing, we're also going to have a drawing as a way of expressing our appreciation for you joining us today. The drawing is for two things. Its first drawing will be for a copy of the text, Why Can't We Get Anything Done Around Here? And the second will be for a free seat in a workshop that we're having coming up for the same title. So we hope that you'll stick around from that. And if you were here today, we have your name already in a bowl, so there's no need to put your business card or anything along that line. Also, we guarantee to get you out of here by 11:30 today without any problem. Absolute guarantee with that. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our speaker, a very well-renowned author, as well as specialist in the area of performance improvement. He's also the co-founder of Psychological Associates and the president of Psychological Associates, and actually a pretty good guy to work for. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Robert Lefton.
Good morning. Glad you could come, and this is a new talk. We've experimented with it just a few times. It's evolved out of a book that the idea for the book was came forth from Jerry Loeb, who was at that point the president of the May Company. Jerry is now retired, but Jerry and I wrote this book, and we actually finished it a couple of years ago, and we wanted to publish it. But he said he wouldn't put his name on it because he was still president of the May Company, and he didn't want anyone to think that he was spending his time on an activity that was outside of the May Company. So I said, well, Jerry, what I'm going to do is just wait for you to retire, and then we can put your name on the book. So he agreed, and he's now retired, and so we now got both of our names on this book. This is a very frequently asked questions. You might hear your boss asked it a lot. The boss may have varying looks on his face when he asks that question. I'm sure sometimes in your work you might ask that question of yourself. And we've got a little sheet here. It just takes about a minute to fill out. But on one side of the sheet it really asks you, what tasks have you been working on? If you could just list no more than 2 to 4 tasks that you have worked on, and just list the task. Don't ignore the headings next to it that says TI and EC and EE. Don't pay any attention to those yet. You'll do that a little bit later. And by the way, you're not going to turn this in or anything. This is for your personal use. That I think will help me get some ideas across as we talk. But I want you to think of tasks that you're doing, that you're performing, and write out 2 to 4 of those. And then I'd like you to think of tasks that you have delegated to your direct reports. You put that on the back side of the sheet. tasks you've delegated to your direct reports, 2 to 4 tasks for them. And as we go through the talk here, I'm going to have you turn to these tasks because it will really help me make some good points with you as we move forward. Does this work out pretty well with Pam when she does it? Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, now think about this as you look at these tasks and think of yourself in a leadership role. In many ways, we're judged by how many things we get done. If you think of it, one of the ultimate criteria that our leaders use in evaluating us is, are we really getting things done? Are we focusing on the right things, the important things? And I think if you hear this expression of frustration from your boss, or if you think about it, one of the ways you might think about it are by looking at these 3 dimensions. These 3 dimensions can open up a whole new way of looking at how much an organization is getting done or how much your people are getting done. Because when we assign tasks, how effective we are really aligning the dimensions of importance, the dimensions of capability, and the dimensions of enjoyment. So if we're delegating a task, say, to a direct report, how important is that task? How capable is the direct report of doing it? And what sort of satisfaction does direct report achieve in working on that particular task? And you can apply the same thing to yourself in saying, how important is it? How capable am I of doing it? And how much am I enjoying it? Now, Jerry Loeb got the idea for this when he was doing a store visit. He was reviewing a store in California. He went out there to see May Robinson's in California. And in the middle of the presentation, one of their HR people brought out a TV tape that was designed to train salespeople to sell more effectively. Now, there was one problem with that tape. One, May has about 60,000 salespeople. May has never had any desire to train their people in selling skills. They train them in administrative skills, but they've never put much emphasis because of the huge number of salespeople and the turnover. There's about 120% turnover of the sales force a year. Yet this HR executive went out and spent $375,000 making a videotape that no one knew he was making, and yet and presenting it to Jerry and saying, look what we have here to train the sales force. When Jerry got on the plane, he was saying, my gosh, how does that ever happen? How does someone get involved in working with something like that and spending that much time and money on it? And then to make it more interesting, what he found out is this particular person who developed this tape turned out to be an expert videographer. He loved to do video things, and that's what he came out of, and he moved into the HR area. And Jerry began thinking, well, how many different tasks do people do that are really not important and relevant to the goals? See, that wasn't part of the goals that MAKE had at that time. That was contrary to their goals. It didn't support their vision or their mission or the goals they set for the year. The person doing it really did enjoy the particular activity, and the person was very capable. It's just that the goal, the particular task, was unimportant. So he began thinking more and more about that. And as we thought about it, and we had many meetings on this, we came to the conclusion, look, how effectively we really make these alignments amongst these three dimensions. And if your boss asks you a question, why is it we seem to move so slow? Or why is it that we can't seem to get things done? Take these three dimensions in your mind and kind of juggle them around, because they'll give you great insights into what might be happening in the entire organization. We see certain cultures, for example, that don't put much emphasis on really focusing on what's important. Or we see certain cultures that don't put much emphasis on assigning tasks to people who are capable of doing them. Just considering those dimensions will help you find some very important answers for your organizations. And in addition, as leaders, this is one of the most crucial things we do. If you think about how important getting things done is, in fact, one of the classic definitions of a leader is getting things done through people. Okay? Well, how do we go about getting those things done? And these three dimensions help us figure that out. Unfortunately, here's what we find as we observe carefully. First of all, we find that people allow their people to substitute what they like doing for what's important. Okay? Think about that. Think of how many times we just have people that are involved in activities, and we don't really evaluate, are those activities or those tasks the person is working on really important to the goals of the organization? Do they fit? Or we continue with the project even when the priorities have changed. We see a person in the middle of a project, we realize that it's unimportant, that it probably has no relevance to the long-term goals of the company, but we say, oh my, well, they're halfway through it, why not just let them finish it and then we'll get on with the next one. Or we spend a lot of time working on tasks that they're incapable of doing. Think about how many people are oftentimes assigned tasks that they're incapable, and do we noodle out then, if that's the case, how are we going to help that person get something done that they might be incapable of doing? We can boost performance significantly by focusing on these three dimensions. And let me define them now. The first dimension we want to look at is the importance and the unimportance one. And let me define what importance means. The task will really help your department or your organization achieve its business and financial goals. If you can clearly state this particular task that I'm doing or I've assigned to my direct reports really fits in with the financial and the business goals of our department or organization, then that's important. If it doesn't get done, it will hurt our performance. Okay? It is correlated with being urgent and relevant. And another aspect about importance is it can change on a dime. What's important today may be unimportant tomorrow. So as a leader, you have to continually assess, is what you're working on is important today as it was yesterday, because that's how the world is changing so rapidly. Jerry and I talked to one CEO who told us how every day, and he lived out in West County, and he deliberately did not take the highway to drive downtown every day. He went right through the city So he would have to stop at stoplights, and when he would stop at stoplights, he would have his goals for the day in front of him, and he was reorganizing them every day in terms of what's important. And he was amazed at how, as each day passed, how each item took on a different sense of urgency or importance. So what's interesting about this dimensions of importance is how dynamic it can be. Now, on your sheet there, where you list the tasks that you do or that you're working on, look at the tasks that you're working on. Now keep in mind, you're not going to hand this in or anything. This is just for your own edification. Look at it really, look at those tasks seriously and say, how does it meet these statements up here in terms of importance? And rate it on a 5-point scale. 1 would be the task is clearly unimportant, and 5 would be it's extremely important. So the higher the number, the more important it really is. A 3 would be it's moderately important. 2 would be it's somewhat unimportant. And 1 would be it's totally unimportant. So look at those tasks and rate them on the importance scale, and do the same thing for your direct report, the ones you listed for your direct reports. Okay, let's look at the next one, capabilities. A capability is also a dimension that can go from incapable to capable. And let's define what we mean by capable. It's having the technical and functional expertise to do the task. So does a person really have the skills and the abilities really to do the task? For example, the person that made this videotape on selling had superb skills. That was his whole field. So he was extraordinarily capable in doing that. Do they have the problem-solving and decision-making skills to do the task? And what can be very important is, do they have the interpersonal skills to do the task? Now, the importance dimension, as we said, changes almost daily sometimes. The capability dimension changes much more slowly. That is an evolving kind of dimension, and it doesn't change nearly as rapidly as importance. Look at these criteria here and rate on a 5-point scale, and look at the task you're doing first and say, look, how capable am I of doing this task? And if you feel you're totally capable, rate it a 5. If you're just moderately capable, make it a 3. If you feel you're incapable of doing it, rate it a 1. And then do the same thing for your direct reports. Now let's look at the next dimension. And that is, do you enjoy doing the task, or do you despise doing it? And of course that too is a dimension, and essentially is, 1, do you have positive feelings and emotions about doing it? This feeling is not necessarily related to logic or facts. It's just, do you inside feel, oh, I really like doing this. I get a lot of satisfaction out of doing this. So this is a much more subjective factor. And now take a look at the tasks that you're doing yourself and say, how much enjoyment am I getting out of doing this task? How do I feel inside about doing it? And then look at your direct reports and say, do I know them well enough that I can rate it, again, on a 5-point scale. If you really derive enormous satisfaction from doing it, rate it a 5. If you say, oh, this is the most horrible task I've ever have to do, rate that a 1. If it's moderate, rate it a 2 or a 3. Okay, now let's put it all together, and you'll see how it begins to make some sense to us. We have always been infatuated by models of behavior. That's been something that's intrigued us for years, because when you put things into a systematic framework, it allows you to think about it in a very systematic way. And Jerry Loeb and I, that's just the way we are. We're wired that way. We're two logical guys who like to think in very systematic ways. And what we did is we put this into the form of a model. And notice how we got the vertical dimension there. There's really 2 vertical dimensions. The one vertical dimension is important, and then you got unimportant. And then you got the other vertical dimension of enjoyable and despised, and then incapable and capable. And looking at this, you can come up with some interesting observations. If you've delegated a task to a direct report that's very important, and that they're very capable of doing, and that they like doing, that's what we call gold star activity. Your direct report is going to take that and run with it, and they're going to get it done. You're going to have to do very little monitoring of it. It's really going to light a fire for that direct report. And they're going to probably be as enthused as they can in terms of doing it. On the other hand, if what you've assigned to the direct report is a task that is very important, that they're capable of doing, that they don't like doing, that's what we call a big D. And a big D, we call it big D because it requires discipline. Just think of what you do when you're given something very important to do, that you have the skill set to do it, but you hate doing it. For example, we had a CEO tell us that the biggest big D he ever has is when he consolidates certain divisions. And he knows as a result of that he's going to have to lay off several hundred people. He said he will keep procrastinating forever in making that decision. And he'll think of everything he can possibly think of to prevent him from making that final decision. For him, it's a big D. Now, here's the interesting thing about big Ds. The higher we go in leadership, the more big Ds we got to do. It comes with the territory as you move up. Don't think that the leaders at the top don't have to do big Ds. They're doing them every day. And that's why it requires an enormous amount of discipline as you move up, because you're constantly faced with making decisions that are very unpopular, very tough, and a lot of times you don't like making those kinds of decisions. Or look at what we call a yellow flag. And we deliberately labeled this a yellow flag because it means caution. This is a task which is very important. the person that likes doing it, but they're incapable of doing it. Okay? So let's say you've assigned a person to do a turnover study. All right? The turnover requires looking at several thousand people in a very complicated organization. It requires tremendous numerical ability skills to do this study, but the person can't stand to do anything numerical. Okay? So you have assigned it to that person. So it's a very important task, and they like doing it, but they don't have the skill set to do it. Or let's even take it a step further and make it a red flag. In a red flag task, it's very important, but the person's incapable of doing it, and they don't like doing it. What do you think will happen if a person is assigned a bunch of red flags? Anybody got any idea? If you continually assign people red flag activities, what's going to happen to them?
They may throw up a white flag.
They may what?
They may
Throw up a white flag, yeah. It means surrender, Nick? Or, yeah, they could do that. Or leave. You know, if you really, what we have found, what Jerry Loeb and I found, which was really interesting, is if you really want to punish somebody, keep signing them red flags. Because you're really putting them in a torture chamber, if you think about it, because you're assigning them very important things that you know they can't do, and they hate. So if you really want to get back at somebody, pick a bunch of red flags and give it to them. And here's our most popular one. This is the one that Jerry and I were intrigued with. And that's the one in the basement there, where people will be assigned tasks that are totally unimportant. That's like what the videographer was doing in California. It's totally unimportant. It's not consistent with the objectives, any objectives of the organization. But the person loves doing it, and they're very capable of doing it. Now, isn't that fun? Think about it. In other words, if you keep working in a black hole, what you've done is you are making your job your hobby. That's what you've done. See? Because you say, my gosh, this is really great. I'm just doing things that I love doing and I'm capable of doing, and I have no concern whether it's important or unimportant. See? Now, what you have to ask is, if you look at the various kinds of tasks your people are working on, where would they fall on this model? Would they be yellow flags? Would they be gold stars? What we find is that some leaders like to keep all the gold star activities to themselves. They're what we call gold star hogs. They hog all the gold stars, keep those for themselves, and they delegate all the big D's and the red flags out to somebody else. Or what we find is some people don't, when they assign a task, they don't really study their people and say, what's the best assignment going to be of this task? How can I really make, my job as a leader is to really ensure that things do get done around here. And therefore, I've got to know my people well enough that I know who's capable of doing what. And knowing who's capable means you've got to study your people and know their skill set, who enjoys it, who derives satisfaction out of doing various things. And do I really have an understanding of the company's objectives, their vision, their mission, their plans, and what the company really thinks is really important. And because they don't study these things carefully, they don't differentiate how they're parceling out tasks. And they oftentimes make an error. And they got people working in red flag areas, yellow flag areas, and black holes, and so forth. And if you kind of take all this together and spin it together, it becomes kind of a mishmash, you know, because they don't know who's doing what, if they've made the proper kind of delegation to people. You could really say this is really good delegation when you use a tool like this to sort out who you're going to assign what. Now, look at what you've written down that you're working on, and say, where would they fall on this model? Out of the 2, 3, or 4 activities that you're personally working on, how would you label it? Would it trend towards being a gold star? Would it trend towards being a yellow flag? Would it trend towards being a red flag? Would it be a big D? Or would it be down in the basement? And then when you look there down in the basement, begin to ask yourself this question. What percentage of time are your direct reports spending working in the basement? Versus, and I call the basement anything down here in the black hole area. Anything below unimportant, you're working in the basement. And how much time are you spending working upstairs? How much time are you working upstairs on the important things? And how much time are your people spending upstairs working on the important things? Now, look at that material you filled out and just take a few seconds here and say, where does it approach on this model? Where would these tasks approach? Because this can help give you some insights into the answer is, why don't we get anything done around here? Now, yes. How many what? Well, a developmental activity could be assigning a person a yellow flag or a red flag. And we're going to get into that because that's a great way of developing people. But if you just hand it to them with no support or help, then it could be destructive. We're going to get into that in just a second. That's a good question. And certainly, you don't want to avoid giving people a yellow flag. You just want to be aware of it so that because you manage that differently than you would a good gold star. Gold star, you give it to a person, let them go. They'll catch fire. Yellow flag, that's where you have to give help. That's where you may form teams. That's where you may assign a coach or a mentor to a person. Okay? By the way, feel free to raise a question any time as we go through this. Okay, have you classified your activities there, your tasks? Let me give you some examples of tasks people have given us as we've talked about this. How would you classify this? An executive who spends 2 hours a day on the computer day trading. His own account, by the way. Yeah, that's a black hole. See? And you say, okay, think about that. Now, here's 2 hours a day spending in the basement working on something totally unimportant. Okay, how about, think of this one. A salesperson who spends at least 30 to 40% of his day calling old customers that he has, who he knows them for years, he's very familiar with, social chit-chatting on the phone, and spending very little time, almost no time, calling new customers that he doesn't know. That's kind of, yeah, you're right. It's a combination. Black hole. The black hole is being obsessed with just the social talk, but it's a big D to call new customers. So you get kind of a combination there. See? Okay, how would you classify just sitting there for hours browsing the computer? Another black hole. Let's say you're many of you here are HR people, putting together all of the plans you have for an impending strike. That could be a combination. It might be, it could be a gold star, even though it's a very, you might have all the skills, it's very important, and maybe you enjoy putting together the plan and so forth, but it also could possibly contain some big D elements in it, something like that. I think the message here is that as leaders, all of us should try to noodle through when we assign a task to our people. How is this task come out in terms of those three dimensions? Because it gives us then some idea of how we can better manage. Okay. Let me ask you this, does anybody have a good example? If you look at your direct report sheet, do any of you have any examples of any direct reports working on a black hole activity or a big D activity or a yellow flag activity or a red flag activity or a gold star? Can you shout it up here? Has anybody got an example of a black hole activity? So all of you keep your people out of the basement. Okay, anybody got an example of a gold star activity? No good. Yes? Well, I can't hear you. Translate that. Screening and recruiting. Okay, and that's a gold star activity. Is that one you've delegated to one of your people? Okay, so it's very important. They like doing it, and they're capable of doing it. That's a good example. Okay, does anybody have a big D? Can you think of it? Any of you got any big Ds? Yes?
I have someone who's doing a benefit analysis.
Uh-huh.
They really have to be disciplined to do it. They can do it. They know it's in the best interest of the company, but it's very, a lot of effort and to try to analyze a lot of survey.
Okay.
Surveys are so subjective.
Okay. So here's something that's very important. Right? The person is capable of doing it, but they're probably not deriving a lot of inner pleasure and satisfaction out of doing it. What do you how do you think you have to manage that kind of task versus a gold star?
I think I try to sit down with the person as we complete a section.
Mm-hmm.
We have separate, like certain deadlines for pieces of it.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the importance of it. We talk about how it fits into the company, where we are.
Okay. All right. Now she's bringing up some very important points. We have found that whenever you assign someone a big D, assign deadlines, develop an action plan with that person, monitor the action plan, keep reminding the person how important this task is to your department and to the organization. Talk about the benefits of getting it done. Okay? In other words, you have to provide much more oversight when someone's working on a big D than when they're working on a gold star. So you see, it gives you, by going through an analysis like this, it gives you some insight on how you got to flex the way you relate to your people, depending on the tasks that they're carrying out. That's a good example. Thank you. Does anybody have a red star? Anything that approaches a red star?
Flag or star?
Oh, I'm not sorry. I mean, a flag. Anybody got a red flag? Sorry. When we first started this, we were dealing with stuff. So I'm going back. I'm regressing. Anybody got a red flag? Yes, sir.
We've got a folder that won't fold, and I assign somebody a task to try to figure it out.
Now, what do you have?
We've got another folder that won't fold the paper.
Uh-huh.
It crumbles it up and spits it out in a bowl.
Uh-huh.
So I've assigned somebody the task of figuring that out, and we're getting all kinds of answers from too much humidity, wet paper, thin paper, thick paper.
Uh-huh.
And it's a brand new folder.
Uh-huh.
so he hates doing it, but he's doing it.
But he's doing it. Okay. So it could be that this is certainly very important, but the person may not be capable, and he doesn't like doing it. Okay. Now, how would you manage a red flag activity like that? Let's say you got a number of people working on red flags.
Why would we?
Why would you do it? Well, that's a good question. Why not reassign it to? Why not reassign that task to someone that might make it a gold star for him? Think about that. See? Now, you might say, well, we'll assign to them for a developmental. They can grow as a result of going through. Fine, as long as you recognize that. And you build in the support and the mentoring and the coaching and the skill sets from outside of the person that can help the person get the thing done. But sometimes the way we drown ourselves in our own department is we'll assign a person a very important task that they're incapable of doing, that they don't enjoy doing. They either do it very poorly or never get it done. And who suffers? How does it project on us? As leaders. See? And if you do this continually, what impact is this going to have on the overall performance of our department? So we're not saying necessarily take it away from the person. See? In fact, we're going to come in with some prescriptions very shortly here. So what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is an analytical tool that you can use when you're making assignments to people. It's a way of managing a task, and that's why we refer to it as the task management model. So, what your questions you can ask is, what tasks do you and your direct reports spend most time working on? What are the tasks you and your direct reports should be working on? And do the tasks you and your direct reports work on lead to high performance? In other words, you can sit down and take a little sheet like you have in front of you there, and when you get back to your department, go through it very carefully, and it will give you great insight into really how you're managing your department. And another interesting thing is, say you're looking at this and you say, well, I don't know whether this direct report has the capabilities or not. Now, that's an interesting insight. If that's the case, then isn't it important for you as a leader to say, look, one of the things that's crucial for me to do as the leader is to take more time in studying what the skill sets are of my various people. So when I assign tasks, I can increase the probability that I'm going to assign that task to the people who are most capable. And should I not also connect with my people enough that I know what they'll enjoy and they don't enjoy? When they talk about the concept of managing by walking around, I always say, look, I like the concept managing by walking around with a purpose. And that purpose is to really get to know your people more. It's to study your people. It's to know who's capable of doing what. It's to know who gets certain qualities of satisfaction. Because if you're able to do that, then you're able to make task assignments that are more effective and that'll result in getting more things done. Yes.
How do you reassign the task when it was that you gave a task that somebody was not capable of doing, for the example you just
Without hurting the person's feelings.
by being constructive and positive so they don't see it as a result?
That gets all, now you're getting into a whole new area of what we call style. The style in which you reassign, and I'll comment on that in just a minute. That's it, because just to go to a person and say, look, you're incapable of doing that, I'm going to take that away from you. Oh, you've just caused a real problem then, see, because you've deflated the person. And we'll talk, okay, what's the best way of making a reassignment like that? Okay. Now, think of all the tasks you and your direct reports do. Because you really think of your whole department when you do that. And ask yourself, what percentage of these tasks had a noticeable impact on the performance of your department? In other words, ask yourself this question. Are we as a department, really focusing on the important things? Are we really separating the signal from the noise? Are we truly aware of what our company's objectives are, their financial objectives, their business objectives? And in becoming aware of this, are we really focusing our efforts being upstairs rather than downstairs in the basement? We're brilliant when we focus on what's important, and we assign it to the most capable people and the people who are going to derive the greatest satisfaction. And these are the various things. I'm not going to bore you with this. You've got these in your notes, but Jerry and I went out and talked to lots of people and said, you know, tell us how you go about assigning tasks. I'll just read a couple of these. We found that people become very preoccupied with activity rather than performance. In other words, they feel if they can just create an illusion that all their people are busy, that's enough. Rather than being concerned about, look, is what they're working on going to be related directly to performance? Or we find that people are very fearful of assigning important tasks to direct reports. For example, they may have, many of you might remember the old Theory X value system that people have about their direct reports. They think their direct reports are incapable. They feel they can't perform important things. So what does the boss do? The boss says, look, I'll do all the important things and you all do the menial things. So you get kind of an authoritarian or Theory X perception. Or they reserve the important tasks for himself and delegates out. That's another kind of a spin-off of the Theory X. So there are many different things that we see. Also, another thing we see that's amazing is a boss will become aware that a person's working in the basement on a black hole task, and because that person, say, is 1/4 of the way through or 1/2, the boss says, well, let him finish it. When the best thing would be to do, stop it. It's unimportant. It doesn't relate to the objectives or the direction of the business. It has no relevance in this organization. Get out of it now. Instead, what we see is this compulsion almost to allow the person to finish it. Okay? Let's look at the 5 most significant errors that we see in relationship to this model. And the first one is they allow black hole activities. The next is they pay too little attention to yellow flag activities. 3, they allow big D activities to slow things down. 4, they miss gold star activity opportunities. And 5, they assign red flag activities. So as Jerry and I kind of went out and observed things and talked to people and interviewed people and studied what was going on, these were the 5 most common errors that we saw. And when your boss comes to you and says, why is it that we can't seem to get anything done around here? What you might do is think about it in terms of these 5 errors, because in all likelihood, the answer falls under one of these 5 areas. Let's look, allow black hole activities to occur. Well, a lot of times we find is that bosses don't even know their people. Like the vice president of HR did not know that his subordinate was working on this videotape. So here the subordinate was working on a video that cost $370,000. They had a big budget, you know. It was a big company. That was a $3 billion division. You know, but here the boss didn't even know, wasn't even aware that the person was working. So it's amazing how many times the boss doesn't realize. Now, what does that tell you about the boss? That shows you that the boss isn't connected. The boss isn't aware of what's really going on. The boss isn't observing like he should. He's not having the kind of meetings where people report what they're doing. And for some reason or other, there seems to be this dynamic that we don't like to ask people to stop doing things that they enjoy doing. It means confronting a person. It means taking something away that they enjoy. And for some reason, there's a reluctance that we have to do that. So it requires a certain amount of discipline to confront a person and say, look, I'd like you to stop that activity because it's irrelevant to the organization. So our advice to you is, in the interest of the business, stop them. Black hole activities have no basis in a meaningful organization. It's really draining your resources. I'm just right now in the middle of the book about Enron. And by the way, if you want to read a book that's very relevant to what we're talking about right now, it's called The Smartest Guys in the Room, is the title of the book. And I'm just about halfway through it. And I started reading it, and by God, before I knew it, I started labeling the different things people were working on. And oh my God, I couldn't believe how many black hole activities that they probably had going on there. And what it does is it just takes consumes a huge amount of your resources, your time, and your energy. And there's really only one effective way of dealing with black hole activities. Get them out of the organization. We have found various departments and organizations where 30 to 40% of people's time were spent on black hole activities. Think of how costly that is to an organization and the impact. We pay too little attention to yellow flag activities. It's perfectly all right to assign a yellow flag activity to a person if you build in, say, the coaching that the person needs, or if you build in a mentor, or if you build a team. Usually when you assign a yellow flag, that's a good time to form a team. And it is a great way to develop people. So supervise it closely, give the person help, provide help, use teams, and be careful you don't overwhelm a person with too many yellow flags. Don't allow big D activities to slow down. Remember this, it's great to give a person a big D. In fact, it's a great developmental activity to have people do important things that they're capable of doing that they don't like doing. But just realize what most of us do when we get a big D. We procrastinate. One of the tasks that people bring up again and again as being a big D is filling out your expense forms. Do any of you love filling out your expense forms? Very few people seem to do that. Love that. And it's a big D for most people because it is important. The company needs that information. Or when you have to let someone go. Think about letting someone go. It could be that it's very important to the organization to let that person go. You're very capable of doing it, but you don't enjoy that. So what do? We keep postponing it, postponing it, postponing it. Procrastination is often the thing you got to watch out most for that. So make sure you tightly structure this situation, develop action plans. You're going to continually have to urge the person to get it done by a certain time. The next is we miss a gold star activity opportunities. By that we mean sometimes we'll just indiscriminately assign a task to the first person who happens to walk by, when in the very next office there might be a person that activity might be a gold star activity. And if you're really working on something where there's a great sense of urgency to get it done, make sure you've properly analyzed the people you're giving it to. So, because if it's a gold star activity, it's going to get done usually quick. You're going to light that fire under the person. And that's a lot of times we miss these opportunities and we make misassignments. And we assign red flag activities. And again, we usually do that when we don't think about the assignment we're making. And if you do that, if you suddenly come to realize that you've assigned a red flag, reassign it. Okay? Or else give that person so much support, to help them get it done. But that's a brutal error. You're hurting the person, because the person's going to be unlikely to be able to do a good job on it alone. So you have to think through, okay, if you made an error, do you correct it by giving them a huge amount of help and support and constant structure and guidance, or are you better off just reassigning it? Okay. So here we have some prescriptions. I'm not going to read all these to you. You have them, but let's just look at a couple of them. I think the most important thing out of this is know your people. Know their strengths, their capabilities, know their skill sets, know what they like doing, they don't like doing. But in addition to that, know what your company's mission is, what their objectives are for the year, what your leaders are saying are really important for the company to get done, that you're tuned in to that, so that as you manage these tasks, you can make sure that you're making the proper assignments. Know what are the most important tasks that must get done to achieve your objectives, and reassess on a daily basis what's important, because that's the one dimension that can change. If there's a terrorist attack tomorrow, what's important today is totally going to change tomorrow. See? And that dimension is very dynamic. You've got some other prescriptions here. Because a person has invested considerable time on a task, does not justify continuing the task, especially if it's in the basement. Okay. So what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, then is a methodology, a system for looking at the kinds of things that we're doing, the kinds of tasks that we're doing personally, the kinds of tasks that we're assigning to our people, delegating to our people, and asking you to look at this in terms of the three dimensions of importance, capability, and enjoyment. And how you align those dimensions will, to a large degree, determine the amount of productivity that you get and the quality of productivity. It's a way of you helping yourself and of helping your organization. And think about this. If we can get organizations, as we said, Jerry and I, in some departments found as much as 30 to 40% of time was being spent in the black holes. Think if you can get an organization like that to just reduce their black hole activity by 10 or 15% and move upstairs where they're working on the most important things, the dramatic impact that can have on the performance of an organization. Part of the dilemma that Enron had was there was an awful lot of basement activities being worked on, and there were an awful lot of important tasks being worked on by people who were incapable. Okay, let me open this up for any questions that you may have. And by the way, you've got a few other slides that we don't have time to get to at this point, but we've covered everything on the task management that we need to. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question about the very next slide?
Yes. Let's go to that one.
Yeah, that one. Which of those bullets are A, B, C, and D?
Yes.
I think I know, but I'm just kind of curious what.
Okay. This one asks, suppose you were working above the line on everything, is what it really says. You're working on Gold Star and Big D, all the tasks assigned were Gold Star. All yellow flag tasks were supplemented with capable people, so you were making sure they were getting done. And all red flag tasks were reassigned. What kind of improvement? What's your estimate? What would you
I
think?
see.
Yeah.
I was interpreting it that if you were able to achieve one of those, you might get around 10%. if you were able to achieve 2 of them, you might get.
Oh, okay.
30.
No. Essentially, if you want to interview that, if you could get more of your people to focus on being upstairs and working on the important things, what increase in performance or productivity do you think you'd get?
I would think at least C.
Yeah, that's the most frequent one that people pick. As they say, probably about a 30 to 60% increase in productivity. Now, it's subjective. It's a judgment. But I think it also reflects the fact that a lot of people feel that a lot of time is being wasted on working in the basement rather than upstairs. Okay. Let's see. Now, the next section gets into leadership style. You can read that because what you'll see is authoritarian leaders, for example, don't do a good job of assigning tasks because many times they don't study their people. So they don't know who's capable and who's not capable. They could care less who enjoys and who doesn't enjoy. Okay. Or if you take a person who tends to be very touchy-feely in their leadership, very submissive and very warm in their leadership style, what they do is they tend to assign tasks that please people. And they disregard what's important, see. So this is where style begins to have an impact on how you assign tasks. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you use this ever as a tool for aligning expectations with staff and yourself?
You could. That'd be an interesting way of doing it. I've never done that, but I think it's got possibilities. Absolutely. I think this is a great tool. I've used it many times in just sitting down with a group of people that run a department and talking about this whole concept. And it's a real eye-opener. They love to talk about it, and they love to think it through. And then they like to use the language. They love the gold star and the big D. For some reason, they love to talk about big Ds and working down in the basement. And we've got one company, whenever I see them, they always come up to me and they said, Bob, we're not nearly working in the basement like we used to. And we've gotten rid of at least 60% of our basement activities. And that's a favorite question I have when I walk in a lot of times. I'll oftentimes say, how much time you spending in the basement this week? Yes?
I assume not all of us are presidents of our companies in here, so we're subject to management ourselves. How do you influence your company and push for this model when you're the person being managed?
When you're a person being managed? Well, first of all, you can start to use it with people you lead. And secondly, when you hear your bosses talking about their frustration in getting things done, you say, well, look, I've just had some ideas that I've heard about. Let's talk about them and pull out the material you got there and start talking about draw up the model on a flip chart pad and say, let's see how we're aligning those 3 dimensions of importance, capability, and enjoyment. Okay? You have great discussion, okay? And it gives a fresh way for your leadership to look at it, and it's non-personalized. There's nothing here that attacks a person or anything like that. You can have a very a rational discussion of the whole area of performance and a very meaningful one. And it gives you kind of a systematic way of looking at it. Any other questions?
I have just a comment.
All right.
I know that often we're in situations where we feel we just don't have the luxury to assign all gold star
Right.
tasks. But hearing what you've said makes me much more sensitive to these dimensions when I want to go back and assess, okay, what's going wrong, what's not working, and
Yeah.
why. And it also makes me more aware of the need to be aware of those dimensions when I am determining how I need to manage those tasks that have been delegated with those people.
Yes.
Whether it's one that's going to require a lot more coaching and guidance and support and setting deadlines, or whether it's one that I can assign and let the person run with it.
Well, Jan, may I make this, Jan, right?
Yes.
May I make this suggestion to you, too? I think you've got a very good observation here, and I would say this to you, and this is where I led my own thinking to. The most important thing I think I can do as a leader is to first separate what I call the signal from the noise. The signal is what's important. And my biggest job is making sure that I get people focused on what's important first. Then I start thinking through, okay, are these gold star activities for the people, red flags, yellow flags, big Ds? At that point I say, okay, I've got to make sure that the person I assign something to that they might be incapable of doing, that I provide the support and help that they need to get it done. And the same with a big D, I know, I say to myself, I better structure this person. I better have this person submit an action plan with time frames on it. Otherwise, it may not get done. So it gives me a way of kind of sorting through, and what it's going to do is going to make your life easier, and you're going to see your productivity improve. Yes, sir?
I think, too, if you're the person that's getting delegated to, you need to look and say, is this a gold star for me?
That's right.
You know, is it a big D? And then push your supervisor to give you that support.
Absolutely. That's another way of doing it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what you got here is a language about tasks that help you talk about it in a constructive way. And that's the neat part of it. And I thank Jerry Loeb for that. He was really very helpful and insightful in doing this. Okay, Jeff, are we ready? John?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Nicely done. And if I'm not mistaken, there were no serious injuries during your talk, Bob, so we appreciate that too. We did promise to get you out of here by 11:30, and we will, of course. As wrapping things up, if you could take a few moments and